A 9-year-old boy pushes his 4-year-old sister out of the way of a speeding car and gets hit instead, suffering multiple fractures. When doctors ask why the children were alone on a busy street, the boy's explanation about their stepfather's negligence makes the entire hospital staff call 911. The apartment on Maple Street held the silence of dawn like a secret. At 6 in the morning, when most 9-year-olds were still buried beneath covers dreaming of Saturday cartoons or playground adventures, Kieran Matthews moved through the cramped living room with the careful precision of someone navigating a minefield. His bare feet found the safe spaces between scattered beer bottles, their amber glass catching the pale October light filtering through windows that desperately needed washing. Derek Lawson lay sprawled across the threadbare couch, one arm dangling toward the floor where his fingers nearly touched an overturned bottle that had leaked its contents into a dark stain on the already damaged carpet. His mouth hung open, producing the rhythmic snoring that had become the soundtrack of Kieran's mornings. Yesterday's construction clothes clung to Derek's unwashed body, the fabric wrinkled and stained with sweat that had dried and redampened multiple times. The smell of stale alcohol mixed with cigarettes and unwashed skin created an atmosphere so thick Kieran had learned to breathe through his mouth during these early morning routines. This had been their reality for 8 months now, since Derek married his mother Rachel in a courthouse ceremony that lasted 15 minutes and changed everything about their lives. Rachel had been desperate then, having lost her job at the insurance office when the company downsized, facing eviction from their previous apartment with 2 young children and no prospects. Derek had appeared like salvation, offering marriage, his income from construction work, and promises to help care for Kieran and 4-year-old Dahlia, while Rachel rebuilt their financial stability. But promises, Kieran had learned, were as fragile as the beer bottles he now collected with practiced silence. He moved methodically around Derek's unconscious form, gathering the evidence of another night spent drinking away whatever demons drove him to the bottom of bottle after bottle. 7 empty beer cans, 3 whiskey bottles in various stages of emptiness, and a half-eaten sandwich that had attracted small black ants marching in organized formation across the coffee table. Kieran had stopped counting the bottles weeks ago, focusing instead on the practical necessity of removing them before Dahlia woke up and potentially hurt herself on broken glass or sharp aluminum edges. The kitchen revealed more evidence of Derek's systematic neglect. Dirty dishes filled the sink, their surfaces growing a film that made Kieran's stomach turn. The garbage can overflowed with takeout containers and more empty bottles, creating a smell that forced him to hold his breath while he worked. But Kieran had developed strategies for everything, learned through months of trial and error what could be managed quietly and what would have to wait until Derek woke up in his usual foul mood. Standing on the wobbly wooden chair that had become his constant companion, Kieran reached into the cabinet for the cereal boxes. Rice Krispies for himself, Cheerios for Dahlia because she liked the way they floated in milk like tiny life preservers. The milk in the refrigerator had an expiration date from 3 days ago, but he had learned to trust his nose more than printed dates. He opened the container carefully, sniffing the contents with the expertise of someone who had made this calculation dozens of times. Still safe, though it wouldn't last much longer. The refrigerator's contents told the story of their situation more clearly than any social worker's report could have documented. A package of hot dogs with 2 remaining, a half loaf of bread going stale, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 servings left, and the questionable milk. No fresh fruits, no vegetables, no snacks designed for children. Derek's unemployment benefits, which he had hidden from Rachel, went entirely toward alcohol, leaving Kieran to manage meals with whatever cash his mother could hide in their bedroom before rushing off to work. Rachel's schedule had become as predictable as Derek's drinking pattern. She left at 5 in the morning for the breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour establishment on the edge of town that catered to factory workers and truck drivers. Her alarm never woke Derek anymore. His alcohol consumption had reached levels that made him essentially unconscious until late morning. She would return briefly at 2 in the afternoon, a 15-minute window Derek had learned to prepare for by setting multiple alarms and forcing himself into a facade of sobriety. During those brief visits, Rachel would check on the children, accept Derek's assurances that everything was under control, and trust that her husband was managing their care appropriately. She had no way of knowing that Derek spent those 15 minutes hiding bottles, airing out the apartment, and presenting a performance of competent stepfathering that dissolved the moment her car disappeared around the corner. Then she would leave again for the dinner shift, not returning until after midnight when both children were asleep and Derek had usually achieved his goal of unconsciousness. The breakfast routine had become Kieran's first major responsibility each day. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, careful measurement of cereal to ensure both containers lasted until Rachel could shop again. The milk had to be divided equally, though Kieran often gave Dahlia slightly more, knowing that her growing body needed the nutrition more than his own. He had learned about child nutrition from the health posters at school, memorizing the food groups and vitamin requirements that no adult in their household seemed concerned about providing. As he prepared their breakfast, Kieran listened carefully to Derek's breathing patterns. Months of vigilance had taught him to distinguish between different levels of unconsciousness. The deep, rhythmic snoring indicated true unconsciousness, when Derek could sleep through almost any noise. The irregular, shallow breathing meant light sleep, when even minor sounds might trigger violent awakening. The worst was when the breathing stopped entirely for long moments, followed by choking gasps that left Kieran wondering if he should call for help or if interference would make things worse. This morning, Derek's breathing held the deep rhythm of heavy unconsciousness, which meant Kieran could move with slightly less caution. But he never abandoned vigilance entirely. Derek's moods upon awakening were unpredictable, ranging from hungover irritability to explosive anger that could be triggered by something as simple as finding dishes in the sink or hearing children's voices at normal volume. The sound of small feet on the hallway's worn linoleum announced Dahlia's awakening. At 4 years old, she moved through the world with the natural curiosity and energy that Kieran remembered having before their lives changed so dramatically. But even she had learned certain rules of their household. Speak quietly until Derek woke up, stay close to Kieran, and never, ever try to wake Derek herself. "Good morning, Dahlia," Kieran whispered as she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her brown hair tangled from sleep and her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. The rabbit, named Mr. Flopsy, had been a gift from their grandmother before she died, and it had become Dahlia's constant companion during the months when adult comfort became scarce and unreliable. "Morning, Kieran," she whispered back, automatically matching his quiet tone. She rubbed her eyes with small fists, leaving her cheek marked with the impression of Mr. Flopsy's button eye. "Is Derek still sleeping?" "Yes, so we need to be very quiet," Kieran reminded her, though the reminder was probably unnecessary. Dahlia had learned the rules of their mornings as thoroughly as Kieran had, developing an instinct for self-preservation that broke his heart while filling him with pride at her adaptability. He lifted her onto her chair at the small kitchen table, noting that her pajamas were getting too small again. The pants rode up above her ankles, and the shirt pulled tight across her growing frame. Adding children's clothing to his mental list of necessities, Kieran placed her bowl of cereal in front of her and watched as she began eating with the careful concentration she brought to most activities now. "After breakfast, we need to get you dressed for school," he told her, settling into his own chair with his smaller portion of cereal. "Teacher Mrs. Garcia said yesterday that they're going to paint pictures of autumn leaves. You'll like that." Dahlia's face brightened at the mention of art activities, one of the few things that still brought uncomplicated joy to her daily routine. "Can I paint red leaves? And orange ones like the tree outside our window." "You can paint whatever colors you want," Kieran assured her, though his attention was partly focused on monitoring Derek's continued unconsciousness. The morning routine required constant vigilance, balancing Dahlia's needs for attention and normalcy with the practical necessity of maintaining silence until Derek's natural awakening occurred. As they ate their simple breakfast, Kieran mentally reviewed the day's schedule and requirements. School started at 8:30, which meant they needed to leave the apartment by 8 o'clock for the 4-block walk to Little Sprouts Preschool. He would drop Dahlia off with teacher Mrs. Garcia, who had begun asking more questions about why a 9-year-old consistently handled preschool logistics, then continue to Millbrook Elementary for his own classes. The questions from Mrs. Garcia had become more frequent and more specific over recent weeks. Where was Dahlia's mother during drop-off time? Why did Kieran always handle pickup arrangements? Were there emergency contact numbers besides his mother's work phone? Kieran had developed a repertoire of responses designed to deflect inquiry while maintaining the facade that everything was normal. His mother worked early shifts, Derek was getting ready for construction work. The arrangement was temporary while they adjusted to new schedules. Each lie felt like swallowing something sharp, but the alternative terrified him more than deception. If authorities discovered their situation, Dahlia might be placed in foster care. They might be separated. Derek's threats about what would happen if Kieran caused trouble echoed in his mind during every interaction with concerned adults. Better to manage their situation himself than risk losing the only family he had left. After breakfast, Kieran helped Dahlia wash her face and brush her teeth, standing behind her on the wobbly chair so she could reach the bathroom sink. The mirror reflected two children who looked older than their years, though for different reasons. Dahlia's eyes held a wariness unusual in 4-year-olds, while Kieran's expression carried the weight of responsibilities no 9-year-old should understand. Getting Dahlia dressed required negotiation and creativity. Her clean clothes were limited, and everything seemed to be shrinking as she grew. Kieran had learned to stretch their laundry cycles by spot cleaning stains and rotating outfits carefully. Today's choice was simple. The blue dress that was getting tight but still looked presentable, paired with leggings that had a small hole in the knee but were otherwise acceptable. "Arms up," he instructed gently, helping her out of her pajamas and into the day's outfit. Dahlia complied with the easy trust she had always shown him, chattering quietly about her plans for the day and her hopes for the art project. Her innocence in the face of their circumstances both protected her and broke Kieran's heart daily. As he braided her hair with movements he had learned through necessity rather than instruction, Kieran listened for any change in Derek's breathing pattern from the living room. The routine of preparing Dahlia for school had become one of his most important responsibilities, requiring attention to details their mother used to handle. Ensuring her clothes were clean and matched, that her hair was neat, that she had eaten enough breakfast to sustain her until lunch. "There," he said, securing the braid with an elastic band that was losing its grip but would last through the school day. "You look beautiful, Dahlia. Teacher Mrs. Garcia will be excited to see you." Dahlia smiled at her reflection, the expression transforming her serious little face into something that reminded Kieran of their mother during happier times. "Will you pick me up today too?" "Of course," Kieran promised, though the words carried weight beyond simple transportation logistics. His promise encompassed everything he could provide: protection, care, consistency, and the security of knowing someone would always come for her. "I'll be there at 3 o'clock, just like always." They gathered the minimal supplies required for their respective school days. Kieran's backpack contained his homework, completed the previous evening by flashlight after Derek had passed out, and the apartment had grown quiet enough for concentration. Dahlia's small bag held Mr. Flopsy, a spare set of clothes in case of accidents, and the snack Kieran had prepared from their limited supplies. The walk to school provided their most peaceful time together each day. Once they left the apartment and Derek's unconscious presence, Dahlia's natural energy emerged. She would skip beside him, pointing out interesting clouds or asking questions about everything they passed. Kieran treasured these moments when he could focus entirely on being her big brother rather than her guardian, protector, and primary caregiver. "Look, Kieran," Dahlia called softly, pointing to a cat sitting in a neighbor's window. "She's watching us walk to school. Do you think she wishes she could come too?" "Maybe she's making sure we get there safely," Kieran suggested, enjoying the game of imagination that had become one of their shared coping mechanisms. "Like a guardian cat who watches over children in the neighborhood." Dahlia giggled at the idea, her laugh carrying the music that had been missing from their household for months. These moments reminded Kieran why every sacrifice was worthwhile, why every exhausting day and sleepless night was justified if it meant keeping her safe and preserving whatever happiness remained in her childhood. Little Sprouts Preschool occupied a converted house painted in cheerful primary colors, with a playground featuring equipment designed for small children and gardens where students learned about plants and growing things. As they approached the familiar building, Kieran felt the usual mixture of relief and anxiety that accompanied these daily separations. Relief that Dahlia would spend her day in a safe, nurturing environment with qualified adults and other children her age. Anxiety about leaving her, even temporarily, and returning home to face whatever mood Derek would display upon awakening. Teacher Mrs. Garcia met them at the classroom door with her usual warm smile, though Kieran noticed her eyes held questions that seemed to grow more persistent each week. She was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the patient demeanor that came from decades of working with young children. Her concern for her students extended beyond classroom hours, and Kieran sensed that she had begun to suspect something wasn't entirely normal about their family situation. "Good morning, Dahlia," Mrs. Garcia said, kneeling to the child's level. "Are you ready for our art project today? We're going to use real leaves to make prints." "Kieran told me we could paint autumn leaves," Dahlia replied, her excitement evident despite her continued whisper-level volume. "I want to make red ones and orange ones." "That sounds perfect," Mrs. Garcia agreed, then looked up at Kieran with an expression that made him uncomfortable. "Kieran, could I speak with you for just a moment?" The request sent anxiety shooting through Kieran's chest, but he nodded and followed the teacher a few steps away from where Dahlia was hanging up her small jacket. These conversations had become more frequent lately, and each one felt like walking on thin ice that might crack beneath him at any moment. "Is everything okay at home?" Mrs. Garcia asked quietly, her voice carrying genuine concern. "I've noticed that you've been handling all of Dahlia's school arrangements lately, and I want to make sure your family has all the support you might need." Kieran had prepared for this question, practicing his response until it sounded natural rather than rehearsed. "Mom works really early shifts at the diner, and Derek has construction jobs that start early too. They asked me to help with getting Dahlia to school since I'm responsible and my school is right nearby." The explanation was partially true, which made it easier to deliver convincingly. Rachel did work early shifts, and Derek supposedly had construction work, though his employment had become sporadic and unreliable as his drinking increased. The implication that both adults were actively involved in family logistics was the crucial deception that protected their precarious stability. "I understand that families sometimes need to work together," Mrs. Garcia said carefully, "but I want you to know that if you ever need help with anything, or if there are problems at home, you can always talk to me or any other adult here at school. That's what we're here for." "Thank you," Kieran replied, forcing a smile that he hoped appeared grateful rather than nervous. "Everything's fine, though. Mom and Derek just appreciate that I'm old enough to help out with things like this." Mrs. Garcia studied his face for a moment longer, and Kieran had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see through his carefully constructed explanations to the truth beneath. But after a pause, she nodded and returned her attention to Dahlia, who was showing Mr. Flopsy the classroom's art supplies with obvious excitement. "All right then," the teacher said. "Dahlia, are you ready to join your friends for morning circle time?" As Kieran watched his sister integrate seamlessly into her preschool routine, surrounded by other 4-year-olds and caring adults, he felt the familiar pang of longing for the childhood they had both lost. Dahlia deserved this every day. Appropriate supervision, educational activities, social interaction with peers, and adults whose primary concern was her development and happiness rather than their own problems. The walk from Little Sprouts to Millbrook Elementary took another 10 minutes, time Kieran used to transition mentally from protective older brother to elementary school student. The shift was never complete, though. Even during his own classes, part of his attention remained focused on monitoring time, calculating when he would need to leave to collect Dahlia, and worrying about what might be happening at home during his absence. Millbrook Elementary was a brick building that had served the community for decades, its hallways echoing with the voices of children who came from families across the economic spectrum. Kieran's teacher, Mr. Thompson, was a young man in his second year of teaching who had quickly recognized that Kieran possessed unusual maturity and problem-solving abilities for a fourth grader. "Good morning, Kieran," Mr. Thompson greeted him as he entered the classroom. "Did you finish the math worksheet we discussed yesterday?" "Yes, sir," Kieran replied, retrieving the completed assignment from his backpack. He had worked on it the previous evening after ensuring Dahlia was asleep and Derek had reached his usual state of unconsciousness, using a flashlight under his blanket to avoid waking anyone with light from their shared bedroom. Mr. Thompson reviewed the worksheet quickly, noting the careful attention to detail and complete accuracy that characterized most of Kieran's work. But he also observed the subtle signs that had become increasingly apparent over recent months. The slight tremor of exhaustion in Kieran's handwriting, the way the boy's eyes constantly darted toward the classroom clock, and the hyper-vigilant attention he paid to time management throughout the school day. "This is excellent work," the teacher said, returning the paper with a smile. "You're really mastering these multiplication concepts. How are things going at home? Your mom mentioned during our last conference that you've been helping a lot with your sister." The question triggered Kieran's well-practiced responses. Though he noted that Mr. Thompson's tone carried the same underlying concern he had begun hearing from other adults. "Everything's good. Mom's working extra shifts to help with our finances, so Derek and I share responsibilities for taking care of Dahlia. She's doing really well in preschool." "That's wonderful that your family works so well as a team," Mr. Thompson replied, though his expression suggested he was processing more than just Kieran's words. "I want you to know that if you ever feel overwhelmed by responsibilities at home, or if you need extra support with anything, you can always come to me. Sometimes families go through difficult periods, and it's okay to ask for help." Kieran nodded politely, recognizing the teacher's genuine care while also understanding the danger inherent in these conversations. Adults who notice too much, who ask too many questions, who express too much concern could trigger investigations that might destroy the fragile stability he had worked so hard to maintain. Better to deflect their worry with reassurances and maintain the facade that everything was manageable. The school day proceeded with its familiar rhythm of lessons, assignments, and carefully monitored time. During mathematics, Kieran solved problems with the automatic precision that came from understanding that academic success was one of the few areas of his life still under his control. In science, he absorbed information about weather patterns and seasonal changes, knowledge that might prove useful for keeping Dahlia entertained and educated during their long hours together at home. But throughout every subject, every activity, every interaction with classmates, part of Kieran's attention remained fixed on the classroom clock. Time moved differently when you carried the weight of responsibility for another person's welfare. Each minute that passed was a minute closer to the end of the school day, when he would need to collect Dahlia and return to whatever situation Derek's awakening had created in their absence. During lunch period, while other children played and socialized with the carefree energy of normal childhood, Kieran sat quietly eating the simple sandwich he had prepared that morning, his mind already planning the afternoon's logistics. Pick up at Little Sprouts at 3 o'clock, the walk home, assessment of Derek's condition and mood, preparation of Dahlia's snack, and management of whatever challenges the rest of the day would bring. He had learned to treasure these moments of relative peace, sitting in the school cafeteria surrounded by the cheerful chaos of his peers, while knowing that soon he would return to the careful vigilance that defined his life outside these walls. School represented safety, normalcy, and the temporary relief of having other adults present who were responsible for everyone's welfare. But it was also a constant reminder of everything he had lost, everything Dahlia would never experience, as long as their situation remained unchanged. As the afternoon wore on and 3 o'clock approached, Kieran gathered his materials and prepared for dismissal with the focused intensity he brought to all transitions. The walk back to Little Sprouts, the collection of Dahlia, the return journey home, each step required careful navigation and constant awareness of potential problems or complications. "Have a good afternoon, Kieran," Mr. Thompson called as students filed out of the classroom. "Remember what I said about asking for help if you need it." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," Kieran replied, already moving toward the door and the responsibilities that waited beyond the school's protective environment. "I'll see you tomorrow." The walk back to Little Sprouts gave him a few minutes to transition mentally from student to guardian, to prepare for whatever Dahlia's day had brought and whatever awaited them at home. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter's approach, reminding him that their situation would become more challenging as the weather grew colder and their financial resources continued to dwindle. Dahlia burst out of the preschool doors with her usual enthusiasm, clutching a paper covered in painted handprints that had been transformed into autumn trees. Her face glowed with the satisfaction of creative accomplishment, and for a moment, Kieran allowed himself to focus entirely on her joy rather than his constant calculations and concerns. "Look what I made," she announced, holding up her artwork with pride. "Mrs. Garcia said I'm very good at mixing colors. The red and orange leaves look just like the real ones." "It's beautiful," Kieran said, genuinely impressed by her work and grateful for the happiness that sparkled in her eyes. "We'll hang it up in our room so we can see it every day." As they began the walk home, Dahlia chattered about her day, describing her classmates' projects and the stories teacher Mrs. Garcia had read during afternoon quiet time. Kieran listened with genuine interest while part of his mind calculated timing, assessed potential problems, and prepared for whatever version of Derek they would find waiting for them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the familiar streets as they made their way back to Maple Street and the apartment that held both their family and their greatest challenges. Each step brought them closer to the delicate balance Kieran would need to maintain through the evening hours. Keeping Dahlia safe and happy while managing Derek's needs and moods, preparing dinner from their limited supplies, ensuring homework was completed, and maintaining the countless small routines that substituted for the adult supervision they lacked. But for these few minutes, walking hand in hand with his sister while she shared the innocent enthusiasms of her preschool day, Kieran allowed himself to simply be her big brother. The weight of his other responsibilities would return soon enough, but this moment belonged to them. Two children making their way home together, connected by love and mutual dependence in a world that had proven far more complicated and dangerous than either of them should have had to understand. As they turned the corner onto Maple Street, Kieran felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied each return to their building. Whatever waited behind their apartment door, whatever challenges the evening would bring, whatever delicate negotiations he would need to manage to keep their family together, all of it lay just ahead. But he had navigated this path successfully for months now, and he would continue to do so for as long as Dahlia needed him to be strong enough for both of them. The Guardian's morning had become the Guardian's entire existence, but love made every sacrifice worthwhile. Friday morning arrived with the deceptive calm that often preceded catastrophe. Kieran woke at his usual time, 6 in the morning, but something felt different immediately. The quality of silence in their apartment had changed, carrying an undertone of danger that made his stomach clench with anxiety before he was fully conscious. Derek's snoring, which typically provided a reliable indicator of his stepfather's condition, was absent. In its place came an irregular pattern of breathing so shallow it was barely audible. Moving with the careful stealth that had become second nature, Kieran crept from the bedroom he shared with Dahlia and peered into the living room. What he saw there sent ice through his veins. Derek lay sprawled across the couch in a position that looked more like collapse than sleep, his face an unhealthy gray color that suggested something had gone terribly wrong during the night. Empty bottles surrounded him in greater numbers than Kieran had ever seen before. Beer cans, wine bottles, and most concerning, a completely empty bottle of whiskey that still sat upright on the coffee table like evidence of deliberate self-destruction. The previous evening had brought news that Derek kept hidden from Rachel, just as he concealed so many aspects of their deteriorating situation. His unemployment benefits, the modest income that theoretically justified his presence in their household, had been suspended due to missed appointments with his caseworker. Rather than seeking employment or admitting his failure to Rachel, Derek had chosen a different response, drinking himself into a stupor that far exceeded his usual dangerous consumption. Kieran approached Derek's unconscious form with the wariness of someone who had learned to read the subtle signs of varying levels of intoxication. This was different from the typical morning stupor. Derek's breathing was so shallow that Kieran had to watch carefully to detect the rise and fall of his chest. His skin had a waxy pallor, and when Kieran ventured close enough to check, his stepfather's pulse felt weak and irregular beneath clammy skin. For a terrifying moment, Kieran wondered if Derek might actually be dying, and what his responsibilities would be in that situation. Should he call for emergency help? What would happen to him and Dahlia if Derek died in their apartment? Would they be blamed somehow? The questions raced through his mind as he stood frozen beside the couch, 9 years old and facing decisions that should never have been his burden. But Derek's breathing continued, and after several minutes of observation, Kieran convinced himself that his stepfather was simply more intoxicated than usual, rather than in immediate medical danger. The decision to leave him undisturbed felt like the safest choice, though every instinct screamed that the situation had moved beyond anything he had managed before. What Kieran discovered next sent his anxiety spiraling into genuine terror. In his collapse the previous night, Derek had fallen in such a way that his body prevented the front door from closing completely. The door stood open perhaps 6 inches, allowing October's cold air to flow freely through their apartment while exposing them to dangers that made Kieran's hands shake as he processed the implications. Never before had Derek's negligence created such obvious vulnerability. The open door represented everything Kieran had worked to prevent: exposure to the outside world, potential discovery of their situation, and most immediately, the possibility that Dahlia might wander into the busy street that lay just beyond their building's entrance. Maple Street carried significant traffic, especially during morning and afternoon commute times, and the intersection with 3rd Street was notorious for accidents involving distracted drivers and inadequate crosswalk timing. Kieran faced an impossible calculation. Approaching Derek to move him away from the door risked triggering violent awakening, as his stepfather had previously lashed out when startled from deep intoxication. But leaving the door open created immediate dangers that his 9-year-old mind could barely encompass. Wind scattered papers throughout their apartment, street noise threatened to wake Derek unpredictably, and most terrifying, anyone passing by could see directly into their living space and observe Derek's unconscious state. The morning routine proceeded with Kieran's heightened anxiety making every task more difficult. Preparing breakfast required extra care to avoid noise that might wake Derek, while the open door created drafts that made the kitchen uncomfortably cold. Dahlia emerged from their bedroom rubbing sleepy eyes, immediately noticing the unusual chill and the sound of traffic that seemed closer than normal. "Why is it so cold?" she asked in her customary whisper, clutching Mr. Flopsy tighter against her chest. Even at 4 years old, she had developed instincts for recognizing when their situation had become more precarious than usual. "Derek had trouble closing the door last night," Kieran explained carefully, unwilling to lie outright but desperate to avoid frightening her with the full truth. "I'll fix it after we eat breakfast, but we need to be extra quiet this morning." Dahlia accepted his explanation with the trust she had always shown him, but Kieran noticed her glancing repeatedly toward the living room where Derek's labored breathing was occasionally audible. Her young mind might not understand the full implications of their situation, but she possessed the survival instincts that had kept her safe during months of inadequate adult supervision. The walk to Little Sprouts preschool that morning felt like navigating a minefield. Every neighbor they encountered, every adult who glanced in their direction, every routine interaction carried the potential for discovery. Kieran found himself analyzing conversations for signs that someone might have noticed the open door, heard unusual sounds from their apartment, or observed Derek's condition during the night. Teacher Mrs. Garcia's morning greeting carried her usual warmth, but Kieran detected additional scrutiny in her examination of Dahlia's appearance and demeanor. The careful questions about their weekend plans and family activities felt more pointed than usual, suggesting that his earlier explanations about their household arrangements were generating increased rather than decreased concern. "Kieran," Mrs. Garcia said as he prepared to leave for his own school, "could I speak with you privately for just a moment?" The request sent familiar anxiety shooting through his chest, but he followed the teacher to a corner of the classroom where their conversation could not be overheard by Dahlia or the other arriving children. These private conversations had become increasingly frequent, and each one felt like walking across ice that might crack beneath him at any moment. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Mrs. Garcia began carefully, "and I want to make sure you understand that there are people who can help families when they're going through difficult times. Sometimes adults struggle with problems that make it hard for them to take care of children properly, and that's when other adults need to step in to make sure everyone stays safe." Her words were chosen carefully, but Kieran understood the underlying message. Mrs. Garcia suspected that their family situation was not as stable as his explanation suggested, and she was preparing to escalate her concerns to appropriate authorities. The realization that his carefully constructed facade was failing sent panic racing through his thoughts as he struggled to formulate a response that would deflect her suspicions without creating additional problems. "Thank you for caring about us," he managed to say, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Mom and Derek really appreciate that Dahlia has such good teachers who look out for her. Everything at home is fine, though. Derek just had a really late night because of work, but he'll be back to normal by this afternoon." Mrs. Garcia studied his face with the expertise of someone who had worked with children and families for decades, and Kieran had the uncomfortable feeling that his explanations were becoming less convincing rather than more reassuring. But after a moment that felt like an eternity, she nodded and returned her attention to the classroom full of 4-year-olds who needed her immediate supervision. "All right, Kieran," she said. "But remember what I said about asking for help when you need it. That's what adults are here for." The school day at Millbrook Elementary proceeded with its familiar rhythm, but Kieran found concentration nearly impossible. His attention remained divided between classroom activities and constant worry about what might be happening at home during his absence. Derek's unprecedented level of intoxication, combined with the open door, created variables that exceeded his ability to predict or control. During mathematics, while other students worked through multiplication problems, Kieran's mind calculated different equations. How long could Derek remain unconscious without medical intervention? What would happen if neighbors noticed the open door and investigated? How would he explain their situation if authorities became involved before he could return home and assess the damage? Mr. Thompson noticed his distraction during the morning lessons, commenting quietly about Kieran's unusual difficulty focusing on tasks that normally came easily to him. The teacher's concern added another layer to Kieran's anxiety, as adult attention from any source felt dangerous when his carefully maintained stability was already threatened. "Are you feeling okay today?" Mr. Thompson asked during a brief private moment while other students worked independently. "You seem worried about something." "I'm fine," Kieran replied automatically, though he knew his response lacked conviction. "Just thinking about a project I need to work on at home." The lunch period brought no relief from his anxiety. While classmates played and socialized with normal childhood enthusiasm, Kieran sat alone calculating timing and potential problems. The afternoon felt interminable as he watched the clock inch toward 3 o'clock, when he could finally collect Dahlia and return home to assess whatever crisis Derek's condition might have created in their absence. When dismissal finally arrived, Kieran gathered his materials and hurried toward Little Sprouts with an urgency that made him almost run through the familiar streets. Every minute away from their apartment was a minute when unpredictable catastrophe might unfold without his presence to manage or prevent it. The weight of responsibility for situations beyond his control pressed down on him as he rushed to collect his sister and return to whatever awaited them. Dahlia emerged from preschool with her usual afternoon energy, chattering about art projects and playground activities, while Kieran struggled to focus on her innocent enthusiasm. Her happiness provided motivation for everything he endured, but today her carefree mood felt especially precious given the danger that might be waiting at home. Teacher Mrs. Garcia said, "I'm really good at cutting paper with scissors," Dahlia announced as they began the walk back to Maple Street. "She let me help her make decorations for next week's Harvest Festival." "Can we go to the festival, Kieran? It sounds like fun." "Maybe," Kieran replied, though his mind was already racing ahead to their apartment and the dozens of variables that might have changed during their absence. "We'll have to see what Mom's work schedule looks like." The walk home felt simultaneously too long and too short. Each step brought them closer to potential catastrophe, but Kieran also found himself wanting to delay their return as long as possible. The afternoon was crisp and clear, with autumn leaves creating a colorful carpet beneath their feet, and other families visible through windows preparing for normal Friday evening activities. The contrast between their situation and the ordinary domestic life surrounding them made their isolation feel even more profound. As they turned the corner onto Maple Street, Kieran's worst fears were confirmed. Their apartment door still stood open, and Derek's unconscious form was visible from the sidewalk to anyone who bothered to look. Worse, a small crowd had gathered near the building's entrance. Mrs. Henderson from the adjacent apartment, Mr. Rodriguez from upstairs, and 2 women Kieran didn't recognize who appeared to be discussing the situation with obvious concern. "Why are those people standing by our building?" Dahlia asked, her voice carrying the first note of anxiety Kieran had heard from her that day. Even at 4 years old, she understood that adult attention from neighbors usually indicated problems. "I'm not sure," Kieran replied, though his heart was pounding with the realization that their situation had moved beyond his ability to manage privately. "Let's go see what's happening." As they approached the building, Mrs. Henderson spotted them and immediately walked over with an expression of genuine concern mixed with confusion. She was an elderly woman who had always been kind to the children, occasionally offering small treats or friendly conversation, but who had maintained appropriate boundaries regarding family privacy. Her presence outside their apartment suggested that Derek's condition had become impossible to ignore. "Kieran, honey," she said gently, "we've been worried about your stepfather. The door to your apartment has been open all day, and we can see him on the couch, but he doesn't respond when we call to him. Is everything okay? Where's your mother?" The questions Kieran had dreaded were finally being asked by adults who could no longer overlook the obvious signs of neglect and dysfunction. His carefully constructed explanations, the elaborate scheduling that hid Derek's daily unconsciousness, the strategic timing that prevented discovery, all of it had collapsed because of an open door and Derek's unprecedented level of intoxication. "Mom's at work," he said automatically, falling back on the partial truths that had protected them for months. "Derek's just really tired from working late last night. He's been sleeping all day." But even as he spoke, Kieran could see that his explanations were no longer sufficient. Mrs. Henderson's expression showed skeptical concern, while the other adults exchanged glances that suggested they were discussing more serious intervention. The situation had moved beyond his control, and the facade he had maintained for so long was crumbling in real time. "Sweetie," Mrs. Henderson said carefully, "adults don't usually sleep so deeply that they can't wake up when people call to them, especially when their front door is standing open. We think maybe your stepfather might need medical help, and we're not sure it's safe for you and Dahlia to be alone with him like this." The words Kieran had feared most were finally being spoken. Adults questioning Derek's fitness as a guardian, recognizing that the children were essentially unsupervised, and preparing to take action that would expose the full extent of their situation. Everything he had worked to prevent was happening at once, and he felt powerless to stop the avalanche of consequences that had begun. As the adults continued their concerned conversation, Kieran noticed movement that made his blood freeze. Dahlia, overwhelmed by the unusual attention and adult voices, had begun moving toward the apartment building's entrance. Her 4-year-old mind sought the familiar comfort of their home space, regardless of the dangers that lay within. But as she moved away from the small crowd of adults, her attention was captured by something that represented everything she had been denied during months of indoor confinement. Across the busy intersection of Maple and 3rd Street, a balloon vendor had set up his colorful display in preparation for weekend sales at the nearby farmers market. Mr. Antonio Restrepo, unaware of the drama unfolding near the apartment building, was inflating dozens of bright balloons that bobbed and danced in the afternoon breeze. The sight immediately captured Dahlia's attention through its promise of color, movement, and joy. Kieran spotted her fixation on the balloons at the same moment he realized she was moving away from the relative safety of the adult group. His heart began racing as he calculated distances, timing, and the multiple threats that were converging simultaneously. The adults were discussing Derek's condition and their responsibilities to report suspected neglect. Dahlia was moving toward dangerous street traffic, and somewhere in their apartment, Derek remained unconscious and unable to provide even the minimal supervision he had previously offered. "Dahlia, wait," Kieran called softly, not wanting to alarm the adults but desperate to maintain control over his sister's movements. But she was already several steps away, her attention completely focused on the bright balloons that represented everything normal childhood should include. For months, Dahlia had been confined to their apartment during Derek's unconscious periods, denied the outdoor play and exploration that 4-year-olds craved. Her patience with indoor activities and quiet behavior had been remarkable, but the sight of the colorful balloons dancing in the breeze broke through her carefully maintained self-control. They represented freedom, joy, and the kind of simple pleasures that had been missing from her daily life. "Look, Kieran," she called back to him, pointing toward the balloon vendor with obvious excitement. "Pretty balloons. Can we go see them?" The request broke Kieran's heart because he understood exactly what the balloons meant to her, while also recognizing the danger they represented. The intersection of Maple and 3rd Street was notorious for accidents involving distracted drivers and pedestrians who misjudged timing or traffic patterns. Friday afternoon brought increased traffic as workers rushed toward their weekends, and the balloon vendor's position partially blocked sightlines for both drivers and pedestrians. "Dahlia, Come back here, Kieran said more urgently, beginning to move toward her while trying to maintain his conversation with the concerned adults. We can look at the balloons later, but right now we need to stay with Mrs. Henderson. But Dahlia's 4-year-old impulses were stronger than her learned caution. The balloons continued their mesmerizing dance in the afternoon breeze, and the cheerful calls of Mr. Restrepo to potential customers added to their appeal. After months of enforced quiet and indoor confinement, the sight and sounds of normal commercial activity proved irresistible. As the adults continued their discussion about Derek's condition and appropriate next steps, Kieran found himself caught between multiple urgent priorities. He needed to participate in the conversation to protect their family's privacy and prevent immediate intervention by authorities. But he also needed to maintain control over Dahlia's movements and ensure her safety in an environment that had become unpredictably dangerous. The moment that changed everything happened with devastating swiftness. Dahlia, drawn by the balloons and operating with a 4-year-old's incomplete understanding of traffic patterns, began moving toward the busy intersection. At the same moment, a sedan driven by businessman Jonathan Pierce approached the intersection at dangerous speed. Pierce was running late for a crucial client meeting that could determine his career advancement, his attention divided between GPS navigation and an important phone call about contract negotiations. Kieran spotted the convergence of danger with the hypervigilant awareness that months of responsibility had developed in him. He could see Dahlia moving toward the street, the speeding car approaching from the opposite direction, and the timing that would bring them together in a collision that would destroy everything he had worked to protect. His decision was instantaneous and completely selfless. There was no time for calculation, no opportunity to weigh alternatives or consider consequences. Kieran launched himself forward with every ounce of strength his 9-year-old body possessed, using physics and momentum to push Dahlia toward the relative safety of the sidewalk while placing himself directly in the path of Pierce's speeding vehicle. The impact occurred with brutal efficiency. Pierce's sedan struck Kieran's small body with devastating force, the collision producing multiple fractures with surgical precision in its destruction. His left leg broke in 2 places with bone protruding through skin, 3 ribs cracked with one puncturing dangerously close to his lung, his left shoulder dislocated completely while tearing ligaments, and stress fractures appeared throughout his frame from the secondary impact with the asphalt. The sound of the collision echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot, immediately drawing attention from everyone within hearing distance. Pierce, finally comprehending the catastrophe, stopped his vehicle and exited in complete shock, his business call forgotten as he stared at the broken child lying motionless on the roadway. Mr. Restrepo immediately called emergency services while attempting basic first aid, his balloon display forgotten as he focused on preserving Kieran's life. Dahlia, physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, screamed for her brother as the reality of what had happened penetrated her 4-year-old understanding. The adults who had been discussing Derek's condition rushed to the accident scene, their previous concerns about family dysfunction suddenly overshadowed by immediate medical emergency. Within minutes, the intersection filled with emergency vehicles, paramedics, and investigators beginning the process of documenting what had occurred. Kieran lay unconscious with multiple fractures clearly visible, his small body dwarfed by the medical equipment being used to stabilize his condition for transport to Millbrook General Hospital. As paramedics worked frantically to save his life, Dahlia clung to Mrs. Henderson and provided the first crucial information that would transform the investigation from accident documentation to potential child endangerment case. Derek is sleeping and won't wake up, and Kieran always takes care of me. The simple statement, delivered through tears and trauma, immediately alerted emergency responders to the broader context surrounding the accident. This was not simply a case of children playing unsupervised, but evidence of systematic neglect that had placed vulnerable minors in situations requiring adult-level decision-making and protection. The balloon vendor's colorful display continued bobbing in the afternoon breeze, now serving as a backdrop to tragedy rather than innocent commercial activity. Emergency lights flashed against the autumn sky as Kieran was loaded into an ambulance, his broken body testimony to a love so profound that a 9-year-old child had willingly sacrificed everything to save his sister's life. The guardian's mourning had led to the guardian's greatest test, and the price of protection had proven to be nearly everything Kieran had to give. But Dahlia was alive, and in his final conscious moment before pain medication took effect, that knowledge made every sacrifice worthwhile. As the ambulance pulled away from the intersection, carrying Kieran toward emergency surgery and an uncertain future, the investigation that would expose Derek's negligence and transform their family's life was already beginning. The breaking point had arrived with devastating force, but from the wreckage would emerge truth, justice, and ultimately, the protection both children had always deserved. The trauma bay at Millbrook General Hospital erupted into controlled chaos the moment Kieran's ambulance arrived. Dr. Patricia Williams, a 15-year veteran of emergency medicine and mother of 2 children herself, took one look at the broken 9-year-old being wheeled through the doors and felt her professional composure waver. The initial assessment revealed devastation that would challenge every resource the hospital possessed. Compound fractures requiring immediate surgical intervention, internal injuries threatening vital organs, and the kind of trauma pattern that spoke of devastating impact with a fast-moving vehicle. "Talk to me," Dr. Williams called to the paramedic team as they transferred Kieran from the ambulance gurney to the hospital's trauma bed. The controlled urgency in her voice masked the horror she felt seeing such extensive injuries in someone so young. 9-year-old male, approximately 70 pounds, struck by vehicle traveling approximately 40 miles per hour. Lead paramedic David Chun reported with clinical precision that couldn't hide his own emotional response to the case. Multiple visible fractures including compound break of left femur, suspected internal bleeding, possible pneumothorax from rib fractures, shoulder dislocation with probable nerve damage. Patient was unconscious at scene. Vital signs unstable, but improving with fluid resuscitation. As the medical team worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize Kieran's condition, additional information filtered in from the accident scene that began painting a picture far more complex than simple childhood mishap. The initial police report mentioned that the injured child had been living with his 4-year-old sister and stepfather, but that the stepfather had been found unconscious in their apartment with evidence of severe alcohol intoxication. Most concerning, witnesses reported that the children appeared to have been unsupervised for extended periods. Dr. Williams processed this information while simultaneously coordinating emergency surgery preparation and trauma stabilization procedures. Her 15 years of emergency medicine had exposed her to every conceivable form of childhood injury and family crisis, but something about this case immediately triggered her protective instincts in ways that transcended professional protocol. "Where's the child's family?" she asked charge nurse Margaret Foster, who was coordinating communication with social services and law enforcement while managing the complex logistics of pediatric trauma care. "Mother's been contacted at her workplace and is en route," Nurse Foster replied, consulting her notes while maintaining visual monitoring of Kieran's vital signs. "Should arrive within 30 minutes. The stepfather was found unconscious due to alcohol intoxication and has been transported to County General for evaluation. There's a 4-year-old sister who witnessed the accident but appears physically unharmed." The mention of a 4-year-old witness sent additional concern through Dr. Williams as she considered the psychological trauma that would accompany whatever family dysfunction had led to this crisis. Emergency departments saw their share of child neglect cases, but the combination of severe physical trauma and obvious family instability created layers of complexity that would require careful navigation. Dahlia sat in the hospital's family consultation room under the temporary care of Mrs. Henderson, who had accompanied them to the hospital despite having no official relationship to the children. The elderly neighbor had taken charge of the traumatized 4-year-old in the absence of any responsible adult family member, providing comfort while hospital staff worked to locate appropriate guardians and begin preliminary investigation into the circumstances surrounding the accident. "Kieran takes care of me," Dahlia repeated for the 3rd time, clutching Mr. Flopsy while rocking slightly in the child-sized chair that had been provided for her comfort. Her voice carried the hollow quality that often accompanied psychological shock, and her repetitive statements suggested she was processing trauma beyond her developmental capacity to understand fully. "Can you tell me about your mommy and daddy?" asked Janet Morrison, the hospital's social worker, who had arrived within 45 minutes of receiving notification about the case. Morrison specialized in pediatric crisis intervention and had developed particular expertise in identifying signs of child neglect or abuse disguised as accidental injury. "Mommy works at the diner with the yellow sign," Dahlia replied with the concrete thinking typical of 4-year-olds. Derek sleeps on the couch and doesn't wake up when I talk to him. Kieran makes my breakfast and walks me to school and reads me stories before bedtime. Each statement from Dahlia painted a picture that made Morrison's professional concern deepen significantly. The casual way the child described what appeared to be systematic role reversal between the 9-year-old and the adults in the household suggested patterns of neglect that extended far beyond simple oversight or temporary difficulty. "Does Derek help take care of you?" Morrison asked gently, using open-ended questions designed to allow Dahlia to describe her experiences without leading or influencing her responses. "Derek sleeps a lot," Dahlia said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes he makes loud noises and Kieran tells me to stay in our room until Derek goes back to sleep. Kieran says Derek is very tired from working, but I don't think Derek goes to work because he's always on the couch when I get home from school." The 4-year-old's observations, delivered with innocent honesty, provided compelling evidence of adult dysfunction that had placed primary caregiving responsibilities on her 9-year-old brother. Morrison had conducted hundreds of interviews with children in crisis, but Dahlia's matter-of-fact description of their household arrangements was particularly disturbing because it revealed systematic neglect rather than episodic problems. Meanwhile, in the trauma bay, Kieran was regaining consciousness following emergency surgery to repair his compound leg fracture. The procedure had been successful in cleaning and stabilizing the bone, but the extent of his other injuries required ongoing monitoring and potential additional interventions. As anesthesia wore off and pain medication began taking effect, his first coherent words immediately struck the medical team as profoundly unusual for a severely injured 9-year-old. "Where's Dahlia?" he asked weakly, his voice barely audible through the oxygen mask providing respiratory support. "Is she hurt? Did the car hit her too? Who's taking care of her?" Dr. Williams leaned closer to hear his questions, noting the immediate concern for his sister's welfare rather than his own severe pain and medical condition. In her experience, injured children typically focused on their own discomfort and fear rather than demonstrating such mature protective instincts toward family members. "Dahlia is safe," Dr. Williams assured him gently. "She wasn't hurt in the accident, and she's here at the hospital with a nice lady who's taking care of her while we help you get better." Relief flickered across Kieran's face, but it was immediately replaced by renewed anxiety as he processed additional implications of their situation. "She needs to have her afternoon snack," he said urgently. "She gets cranky if she doesn't eat something around 4 o'clock. And she can't sleep without her bedtime story. Someone has to read to her or she has nightmares." The specificity of his concerns about Dahlia's care routines suggested knowledge and responsibility far beyond typical sibling relationships. Dr. Williams exchanged glances with Nurse Foster, both recognizing signs that indicated this child had been functioning as primary caregiver rather than simply helpful older brother. "We'll make sure Dahlia gets everything she needs," Dr. Williams promised, while making mental notes to share these observations with social services. "Right now, I need you to focus on resting and letting your body heal from your injuries." But Kieran's attention remained fixed on caregiving responsibilities despite his own severe medical condition. "Did someone call Mom at work? She'll be worried, but she can't leave during dinner rush unless it's a real emergency. And Derek won't be able to help because he was sleeping really deeply this morning. Someone needs to explain to Mom what happened so she doesn't blame Derek." The mention of Derek's condition, combined with Kieran's obvious familiarity with adult responsibilities and family crisis management, provided additional evidence supporting Morrison's preliminary assessment of systematic neglect. Dr. Williams realized they were dealing with a child who had assumed adult-level responsibilities for family functioning, and that his heroic action in saving his sister was consistent with a pattern of protective behavior that had likely been developing for months. "Kieran," Dr. Williams said carefully, "can you help me understand what happened today? How did you and Dahlia end up near that busy street?" The question represented the critical moment that would transform the case from accident investigation to child endangerment inquiry. Hospital protocol required documentation of circumstances surrounding pediatric trauma, but Dr. Williams also recognized that Kieran's answer would likely expose family dysfunction that mandated immediate intervention by Child Protective Services. Kieran's response came with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing routine rather than crisis. "Derek was sleeping really deeply because he drank more last night than usual." The door got stuck open when he fell asleep, and I couldn't close it without waking him up, which makes him angry. Dahlia saw the balloons across the street and wanted to look at them, but I was talking to Mrs. Henderson about Derek not waking up when people called to him. The explanation, delivered with heartbreaking honesty, immediately sent shock waves through every medical professional within hearing distance. Charge Nurse Foster stopped her documentation entirely to focus on Kieran's words. Orderly James Washington abandoned his supply duties to listen fully. Administrative Coordinator Lisa Chong paused insurance verification to hear testimony that was painting a devastating picture of child abandonment. "Can you tell me more about Derek sleeping?" Dr. Williams asked gently, recognizing that she was documenting evidence of systematic neglect while also providing medical care to its victim. Kieran's detailed account revealed the full scope of their abandonment with devastating precision. He described Derek's daily drinking pattern, unconsciousness from mid-morning until evening, periods of dangerous awakening when Derek became violent if disturbed, and complete absence of adult supervision for 8 to 12 hours daily. He explained his role as Dahlia's primary caregiver with the resignation of someone describing normal routine, preparing all meals, managing hygiene and clothing, ensuring safety during Derek's unconscious periods, maintaining elaborate deceptions to prevent outside intervention. "I make breakfast for both of us before school," Kieran continued, his voice growing stronger as pain medication took full effect. "Dahlia likes Cheerios because they look like tiny donuts, and I give her most of the milk because she's still growing. After school, I pick her up from Little Sprouts and we walk home together. If Derek is awake, I tell him about our day and ask if he needs anything. If he's sleeping, I make sure Dahlia stays quiet and doesn't disturb him." The hospital staff's reaction was immediate and unprecedented in scope. Dr. Williams signaled for additional personnel to witness and document Kieran's testimony while maintaining the interview's natural flow. The nursing staff began implementing protocols for suspected child abuse cases, while administrative personnel contacted hospital security and legal services to ensure proper handling of evidence that would likely result in criminal charges. "What happens when your mom isn't home?" Dr. Williams asked, though she was beginning to understand that Rachel's absence was more the norm than the exception. "Mom works 2 shifts at Murphy's Diner," Kieran explained with the precision of someone who had memorized adult schedules out of necessity. "She leaves at 5 in the morning for breakfast shift, comes home at 2 o'clock to check on us, then goes back at 4 for dinner shift. She doesn't get home until after midnight, so Derek is supposed to take care of us during those times." The word, supposed, carried devastating implications about the gap between family expectations and daily reality. Kieran's matter-of-fact description of essentially parenting his sister while managing an alcoholic stepfather revealed systematic abandonment disguised as functional family arrangement. "And what does Derek do during those times when he's supposed to be taking care of you?" Dr. Williams asked, though Kieran's previous statements had already provided compelling answers. "Derek sleeps most of the time," Kieran replied without accusation or self-pity. "Sometimes he wakes up and asks for coffee or aspirin, but usually he just sleeps until Mom comes home at 2 o'clock. I've learned to tell when he's sleeping deeply enough that normal sounds won't wake him up, and when he's sleeping lightly and might get angry if disturbed." The clinical precision with which a 9-year-old described managing an adult's alcohol-induced unconsciousness struck every listening professional as evidence of systematic child endangerment. Dr. Williams realized they were documenting not just neglect, but the extraordinary adaptation a child had developed to survive in circumstances that should have triggered protective intervention months earlier. As Kieran continued his testimony, additional hospital staff found reasons to enter the trauma bay or linger nearby, drawn by the extraordinary account of childhood heroism emerging from systematic family dysfunction. Patient Advocate Coordinator Sandra Martinez arrived to ensure proper documentation and legal compliance. Hospital Chaplain Father Michael O'Brien was summoned to provide emotional support for medical staff struggling to process the systematic child abandonment they were uncovering. "Kieran," Dr. Williams said carefully, "you mentioned that Derek was sleeping more deeply than usual this morning. Can you tell me about that?" The question elicited details that would prove crucial for law enforcement investigation and Child Protective Services intervention. Kieran described finding Derek unconscious with unprecedented numbers of empty alcohol containers, his dangerous physical condition, and the open door that could not be safely closed without risking violent awakening. I was scared Derek might be really sick, Kieran admitted. But I didn't know who to call for help without getting our family in trouble. I thought if I could keep Dahlia safe until Mom came home at 2 o'clock, maybe Derek would be better by then and nobody would have to know how bad things got. The weight of impossible decisions placed on a 9-year-old child moved several hospital staff members to tears, while simultaneously providing evidence of the systematic failures that had created such desperate circumstances. Dr. Williams realized that Kieran's heroic action in saving his sister was consistent with months of similar protective decisions, each one requiring adult-level judgment and self-sacrifice. Within 2 hours of Kieran's initial testimony, Millbrook General's corridors filled with investigators representing multiple agencies working in coordinated response. Detective Sarah Coleman, specializing in child welfare cases, arrived with Officer Michael Torres, trained in pediatric interview techniques. Child Protective Services Supervisor Amanda Richardson coordinated with hospital social services while ensuring proper legal documentation of testimony that was painting an undeniable picture of criminal neglect. Each professional who interviewed Kieran emerged profoundly affected by his detailed accounts of systematic abandonment delivered without self-pity or accusation. His descriptions revealed a child who had developed sophisticated survival strategies while maintaining extraordinary concern for his sister's physical and emotional well-being. "Can you tell me about preparing meals for Dahlia?" Detective Coleman asked during her formal interview, seeking specific details that would support criminal charges against Derek. Kieran's response provided devastating evidence of adult failure. "I stand on the wooden chair to reach the cabinets and stove. I know which foods are safe for Dahlia to eat and which ones might make her sick if they're too old. I learned to cook simple things like scrambled eggs and grilled cheese sandwiches, but mostly we eat cereal and sandwiches because those are easier and don't make noise that might wake Derek." His matter-of-fact description of 9-year-old meal planning and food safety management provided compelling documentation of systematic role reversal that had placed adult responsibilities on a child while adults remained unconscious or absent. The investigation expanded rapidly as authorities coordinated simultaneous actions across multiple locations. Police officers had been dispatched to the Matthews apartment, where they found Derek exactly as Kieran described, unconscious, surrounded by empty alcohol containers, with overwhelming evidence of systematic child neglect throughout the residence. Social workers were implementing emergency placement procedures while ensuring both children received appropriate psychological support. Rachel's arrival at the hospital occurred during the height of the investigation, her initial focus entirely on Kieran's medical condition and recovery prognosis. Her questions about surgeries required, rehabilitation timeline, and long-term implications gradually gave way to devastating comprehension as investigators explained the circumstances that had led to the accident. "What do you mean they were unsupervised?" Rachel asked, confusion and growing horror evident in her voice. "Derek was supposed to be watching them. He assured me this morning that everything was under control when I left for work." The revelation that her trust in Derek's caregiving abilities had been systematically exploited hit Rachel with devastating force. Social worker Morrison presented her with Kieran's detailed testimony about their daily routine, Derek's drinking patterns, and the extraordinary responsibilities that had been placed on her 9-year-old son. "This can't be accurate," Rachel said, though her voice lacked conviction as she processed information that explained months of subtle changes she had noticed but failed to investigate. "Derek told me he was managing things well. Kieran never said anything about problems at home." Morrison's gentle explanation of how children often protect dysfunctional adults to prevent family dissolution helped Rachel understand why her son had maintained elaborate deceptions rather than seeking help. The realization that her work schedule had inadvertently enabled systematic neglect while her children developed survival strategies to cope with adult abandonment left her struggling with overwhelming guilt and responsibility. As the afternoon progressed and evidence mounted, the scope of Derek's failure as stepfather and guardian became undeniable. Hospital staff who had initially focused on treating Kieran's physical injuries found themselves documenting a case that would likely result in criminal prosecution for child endangerment, while social services prepared for intensive family intervention and support. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, arrived to begin preliminary assessment of both children's psychological needs. Her initial evaluation of Kieran revealed the complex emotional landscape of a child forced into premature adult responsibilities while maintaining deep protective instincts toward his sister. Kieran shows signs of chronic hypervigilance and anxiety consistent with extended periods of inappropriate responsibility, Dr. Martinez explained to the assembled professionals. His immediate concern for his sister's welfare, even while experiencing severe physical trauma, indicates attachment patterns that have developed in response to systematic adult failure. Dahlia's psychological evaluation revealed different but equally concerning patterns. Separation anxiety focused specifically on Kieran rather than adult caregivers, regression behaviors consistent with trauma exposure, and play therapy responses indicating that she viewed her brother as primary attachment figure and protector. As evening approached and the full scope of the investigation became clear, hospital staff found themselves processing not just a medical emergency, but a case that exposed fundamental failures in systems designed to protect vulnerable children. The courage of a 9-year-old boy had saved his sister's life while simultaneously exposing the systematic neglect that had placed them in mortal danger. Kieran's testimony, delivered with heartbreaking honesty despite severe physical trauma, provided compelling evidence that would ultimately bring justice and protection for both children. But more immediately, his words had accomplished what months of suffering in silence had not. They had finally brought adult attention and intervention to a situation that required immediate protective action. The truth had been unveiled through tragedy, but from that truth would emerge the justice and safety both children had always deserved. The guardian's greatest sacrifice had become the key to unlocking the protection that proper adults should have provided all along. The coordinated law enforcement response at the Matthews apartment began within hours of Kieran's hospital testimony, as Detective Sarah Coleman and Officer Michael Torres arrived to find a scene that perfectly corroborated every detail the 9-year-old had provided. Derek remained unconscious on the threadbare couch, surrounded by evidence of systematic neglect so overwhelming that even experienced child welfare investigators found themselves shaken by the conditions these children had endured for months. "Jesus Christ," Officer Torres muttered under his breath as they documented the apartment's condition, his professional composure cracking despite 15 years of experience with domestic crisis calls. Empty bottles covered every available surface, creating a landscape of glass and aluminum that spoke to daily consumption far exceeding casual drinking. The kitchen revealed spoiled food, unwashed dishes growing bacterial films, and a refrigerator containing only items a child could prepare safely. Detective Coleman methodically photographed evidence while maintaining the clinical detachment necessary for building a criminal case. But her documentation revealed systematic child abandonment disguised as family dysfunction. Children's drawings on walls showed stick figures where one small form cared for an even smaller one while an adult figure lay horizontal and motionless. The bathroom contained evidence of a child's attempts to maintain hygiene for himself and a younger sibling. Step stools positioned for reaching sinks, toothbrushes arranged with careful precision, and towels folded with the obsessive neatness of someone trying to maintain control in an uncontrollable situation. Derek's arrest occurred while he remained heavily intoxicated and disoriented, unable to comprehend the severity of charges being filed against him or the devastating consequences of his systematic negligence. His booking at Millbrook Police Station revealed a pattern of alcohol-related incidents spanning several years. Employment terminations due to drinking, landlord complaints about disruptive behavior, and missed appointments with social services that had resulted in benefit suspensions. "Where are the kids?" Derek mumbled during intake processing, his first expression of concern for the children occurring only after learning that authorities were involved. "Rachel's gonna be pissed if something happened while she was at work." The booking sergeant noted Derek's complete failure to grasp the situation's gravity, his primary concern being Rachel's reaction rather than the children's welfare or his own criminal liability. Even when informed that Kieran was hospitalized with life-threatening injuries sustained while protecting his sister, Derek's response focused on avoiding responsibility rather than expressing concern for the child's condition. Back at Millbrook General Hospital, Rachel's emotional journey intensified as she confronted the full scope of her unknowing complicity in her children's systematic abandonment. The meeting with social worker Janet Morrison revealed how Derek had orchestrated elaborate deceptions to conceal his daily drinking and complete failure as caregiver, while Rachel's exhausting work schedule had prevented her from recognizing obvious warning signs. I trusted him, Rachel said repeatedly, her voice carrying the hollow quality of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been shattered. He promised me he could handle things while I worked. He said the children were doing well, that Kieran was just being helpful like a good big brother should be. Morrison's patient explanation of systematic manipulation helped Rachel understand how Derek had exploited her desperation for adult support and financial stability. His strategic timing of consciousness around her afternoon visits, his interception of calls from school officials, and his careful concealment of alcohol consumption had created a facade of competent caregiving that dissolved the moment Rachel left for work. Children often protect dysfunctional adults to prevent family dissolution, Morrison explained gently. Kieran's elaborate deceptions weren't lies told to hurt you. They were survival strategies developed to keep your family together and prevent authorities from separating him from Dahlia. The realization that her 9-year-old son had assumed adult responsibilities to compensate for Derek's failures, while simultaneously protecting her from knowledge that would have devastated their fragile stability, left Rachel struggling with overwhelming guilt. Every sign she had rationalized away Kieran's increasing maturity, his hypervigilant attention to time, his detailed knowledge of Dahlia's care routines, now appeared as desperate attempts to maintain family functioning while the designated adult remained unconscious. The investigation expanded through systematic interviews with community members who had observed concerning signs but failed to report them to appropriate authorities. Each conversation revealed missed opportunities for intervention and the gradual normalization of dysfunction that had allowed dangerous situations to persist without outside recognition. Teacher Mrs. Garcia from Little Sprouts Preschool provided crucial testimony during her formal interview with Detective Coleman, admitting to months of growing concern about Kieran's role in Dahlia's daily care. I knew something wasn't quite right about a 9-year-old handling all the preschool logistics, she said, her voice heavy with regret. But his explanations always seemed reasonable, and Dahlia appeared well cared for. I should have investigated more thoroughly instead of accepting surface explanations. Her documentation revealed a pattern of increasingly pointed questions about family arrangements, each one deflected by Kieran's carefully prepared responses about adult work schedules and temporary arrangements. The teacher's notes showed her progressive concern, but also her hesitation to intrude on family privacy without concrete evidence of abuse or neglect. School nurse Patricia Valdez offered equally damning testimony about Kieran's behavioral changes over recent months, providing detailed records that painted a picture of a child under extraordinary stress. He frequently arrived without lunch money, claiming he had forgotten it, she explained to investigators. But his requests for additional snacks from my office, combined with his questions about child nutrition and food safety, suggested he was managing meal planning for more than just himself. Her documentation included concerning observations about Kieran's hypervigilant time monitoring, his anxiety about school dismissal schedules, and his mature problem-solving approaches that exceeded typical fourth-grade development. Most significantly, she had noted his reluctance to discuss home life and his tendency to deflect personal questions with inquiries about hypothetical family situations. Mr. Thompson, Kieran's fourth-grade teacher, provided comprehensive documentation of academic and behavioral changes that supported the growing evidence of systematic family dysfunction. His records showed declining performance not due to intellectual limitations, but due to chronic exhaustion and divided attention between educational requirements and caregiving responsibilities. Kieran's homework quality remained excellent, but I noticed he often seemed tired and had difficulty concentrating during morning lessons, Thompson explained during his interview with social services. When I asked about his sleep schedule, he mentioned staying awake to make sure his sister was safe during the night. At the time, I interpreted this as typical sibling protectiveness, but in retrospect, it suggests he was functioning as primary nighttime supervisor. The teacher's observations included detailed notes about Kieran's clock-watching behavior, his anxiety about pickup timing, and his exceptional knowledge of child development topics unusual for someone his age. Most concerning were Thompson's records of Kieran's questions about family emergency procedures and his research requests about child safety topics that suggested he was preparing for crisis management scenarios. Detective Coleman's criminal investigation built systematic evidence of child endangerment through comprehensive documentation spanning multiple months. Bank records revealed Derek's unemployment benefits being spent exclusively on alcohol purchases rather than household necessities or children's needs. Credit card statements showed no expenditures for children's clothing, appropriate food, or educational materials during Derek's period of sole daytime responsibility. Grocery store receipts provided particularly damning evidence, showing purchases made using Rachel's limited cash with item selections clearly indicating a child was making shopping decisions. Store security footage revealed Kieran making these purchases alone, struggling to reach items and count money with the concentration of someone managing adult responsibilities far beyond his developmental capacity. The pattern is unmistakable, Detective Coleman explained to prosecutor Amanda Foster during case preparation. Derek systematically spent family resources on alcohol, while a 9-year-old assumed responsibility for household management and childcare. The evidence shows months of escalating neglect culminating in life-threatening circumstances. Prosecutor Foster approached the case with unusual personal investment, recognizing that Kieran's heroism provided stark contrast to Derek's complete failure as stepfather and guardian. Her preparation included medical testimony about Kieran's injuries, psychological evaluation of trauma inflicted on both children, and comprehensive documentation of Derek's systematic negligence that had culminated in near-fatal consequences. This isn't a case of poor judgment or temporary family stress, Foster explained to her staff during case preparation. The evidence shows deliberate abandonment of parental responsibilities, systematic deception of the children's mother, and criminal neglect that placed vulnerable minors in mortal danger. The charges filed against Derek reflected the severity of his systematic failures. Multiple counts of child endangerment, criminal neglect of minors, reckless endangerment resulting in serious bodily injury, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor by forcing inappropriate responsibilities on Kieran. Each charge carried significant potential prison time, and the cumulative effect painted a picture of systematic child abuse disguised as family dysfunction. Derek's court-appointed public defender, Attorney James Walsh, faced overwhelming evidence and a client whose behavior continued demonstrating unfitness as guardian even during legal proceedings. Derek's primary concerns remained focused on his own inconvenience rather than the children's welfare, and his continued attempts to minimize his responsibility created additional evidence of his unsuitable character. The defendant shows no recognition of the harm his actions caused, Walsh admitted privately to colleagues. He continues to frame this as temporary family difficulties, rather than acknowledging the systematic endangerment that nearly resulted in his stepson's death. Community response intensified as local news outlets investigated beyond initial accident reports to uncover the deeper story of systematic neglect and extraordinary childhood heroism. Reporter Jennifer Walsh's investigation revealed broader context that resonated throughout Millbrook. Working families struggling with inadequate support systems, warning signs that community members observed but failed to report, and systemic gaps that allowed dangerous situations to develop without intervention. The media coverage sparked community-wide examination of collective responsibility for protecting vulnerable children. Neighbors who had noticed concerning signs but assumed others would intervene began questioning their own role in the systematic failures that had allowed Derek's neglect to persist. School officials acknowledged policies that prioritized family privacy over child protection, while social services recognized resource limitations that prevented proactive family support. Hospital social services coordinated with child protective services to ensure appropriate placement for both children during legal proceedings and family reconstruction processes. Rachel's genuine cooperation with authorities, combined with her evident shock at discovering Derek's systematic deception, allowed caseworkers to pursue family preservation rather than immediate foster placement, though strict conditions were imposed for the children's protection. The conditions included complete prohibition of Derek's contact with the children, comprehensive parenting evaluation for Rachel, mandatory family counseling, regular home visits by social services, and extensive psychological support for both children to address trauma from the accident and months of inappropriate responsibility. Rachel's compliance with these requirements would determine whether the family could remain together during the recovery process. Child psychologist Dr. Rebecca Martinez began intensive therapeutic work with Kieran to address both physical trauma from the accident and psychological effects of premature caregiver responsibilities. Her sessions revealed the extraordinary emotional burden he had carried while maintaining protective instincts that exceeded typical childhood development. Kieran demonstrates hypervigilance and anxiety patterns consistent with chronic stress exposure. Dr. Martinez explained to the treatment team. His immediate concern for his sister's welfare, even while experiencing severe medical trauma, indicates attachment disruption caused by systematic adult failure. He has essentially functioned as primary parent while learning to navigate an alcoholic adult's unpredictable behavior. Her therapeutic approach focused on helping Kieran understand that his exceptional burden had been neither normal nor acceptable for any child, regardless of family circumstances. The work required careful balance between validating his protective achievements while helping him release inappropriate responsibilities and learn to trust adults for care and protection. Dahlia's therapeutic needs focused on different but equally important issues through specialized play therapy with child development expert Dr. Amanda Chun. Her sessions revealed the extent to which Kieran had functioned as primary attachment figure, while also addressing separation anxiety and regression behaviors consistent with trauma exposure. Dahlia's play patterns show clear preference for scenarios where children care for other children rather than adults providing protection, Dr. Chun observed. Her drawings consistently depict Kieran in parental roles, while adult figures remain absent or inactive. She has learned to depend on her brother for both physical care and emotional security. The therapeutic work aimed to help Dahlia develop appropriate attachment to adult caregivers while maintaining her special bond with Kieran in age-appropriate ways. The process required careful attention to her developmental needs while addressing trauma responses that had shaped her understanding of family relationships and adult reliability. As Derek's case progressed through the legal system, plea negotiations revealed the prosecution's determination to achieve justice, reflecting the severity of his systematic neglect. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Kieran's detailed testimony supported by physical evidence, medical documentation of chronic stress and malnutrition in both children, community testimony about observable signs of abandonment, and Derek's own statements demonstrating continued unfitness as guardian. The defendant's plea options are limited by the strength of evidence and the severity of harm caused, Prosecutor Foster explained during negotiations. The community demands accountability for systematic child endangerment that nearly resulted in death, and the court needs assurance that these children will be protected from any future contact with someone who proved incapable of basic caregiving responsibilities. Derek's defense attorney struggled to find mitigating factors in a case where a child's heroism highlighted the defendant's complete failure as adult protector. Even Derek's own family history of alcohol abuse and difficult circumstances could not excuse the systematic abandonment that had placed primary caregiving responsibilities on a 9-year-old while adults remained unconscious or absent. Rachel's transformation began through intensive work with family counselor Dr. Maria Santos, who specialized in helping parents rebuild relationships with children after crisis or trauma. The sessions helped Rachel understand how survival-focused decision-making had inadvertently enabled Derek's abuse, while teaching her strategies for rebuilding trust and appropriate family dynamics. Rachel is experiencing complex grief, Dr. Santos explained to the treatment team. She's mourning the loss of what she believed was a functional family arrangement, while processing guilt about her children's suffering and fear about their future relationship. Her recovery requires both practical skill development and emotional healing. The therapeutic work focused on helping Rachel develop confidence in her parenting abilities while learning to recognize signs of dysfunction she had previously missed or rationalized. The process was complicated by financial stress, single parenthood challenges, and the practical difficulties of rebuilding family life after systematic deception and trauma. Community support emerged as local organizations rallied to provide practical assistance for the family's reconstruction. Murphy's Diner customers contributed to funds for medical expenses and family counseling, while local businesses offered services at reduced rates. Church groups provided meal assistance and childcare support, creating the community network that had been missing during their months of isolation and struggle. The support extended beyond immediate crisis response to address systemic issues that had contributed to their vulnerability. Community leaders initiated discussions about improving child protection systems, supporting working families with adequate childcare resources, and creating better mechanisms for identifying and responding to family dysfunction before it reached crisis levels. As autumn progressed toward winter and Kieran's physical recovery continued, the legal proceedings moved toward resolution that would provide both justice and protection for the children. Derek's eventual plea agreement included significant prison time, mandatory alcohol treatment, and permanent prohibition from contact with Kieran and Dahlia. More importantly, formal termination of his parental rights would legally free the family from any future threat of his return. The investigation had revealed not just individual criminal behavior, but systematic failures that had allowed vulnerable children to suffer in isolation while developing extraordinary survival strategies. Kieran's testimony had exposed the truth with devastating clarity, but from that truth emerged the justice and protection both children had always deserved. The guardian's burden was finally being lifted by the very adults who should have provided protection all along. Justice would be served, and healing could begin for a family that had survived the unthinkable through the extraordinary courage of a 9-year-old boy who had loved his sister enough to sacrifice everything for her safety. 10 months after the accident that had shattered and ultimately saved their family, Kieran Matthews took his first steps without any assistive devices in the physical therapy wing of Millbrook General Hospital. The same corridors that had witnessed his arrival as a critically injured and traumatized child now celebrated his remarkable recovery under the careful guidance of physical therapist James Rodriguez, who had worked with Kieran throughout his rehabilitation process and continued to marvel at the boy's determination while observing his profound transformation from protector to protected child. "How does that feel?" Rodriguez asked as Kieran completed a circuit of the therapy room, his gait steady and confident despite the slight limp that would likely remain as a permanent reminder of his sacrifice. The physical therapist had witnessed hundreds of pediatric recoveries, but Kieran's case held special significance due to both the severity of his injuries and the extraordinary circumstances that had caused them. "It feels like freedom," Kieran replied, his voice carrying a lightness that had been absent during the early months of recovery. The simple statement encompassed far more than physical mobility. It represented the lifting of burdens that no 9-year-old should have carried, the restoration of childhood that trauma had temporarily stolen, and the security that came from knowing responsible adults were finally providing the protection both he and Dahlia deserved. The legal resolution had provided comprehensive closure and appropriate justice for the systematic neglect that had nearly proved fatal. Derek's plea agreement, reached after months of overwhelming evidence compilation, included 2 years in state prison followed by mandatory completion of intensive alcohol treatment programs, 5 years of supervised probation upon release, and a permanent restraining order preventing any contact with Kieran, Dahlia, or Rachel. Most significantly for the family's long-term security, Derek's parental rights had been formally terminated through legal proceedings that Rachel had initiated with the support of victim advocacy services. Judge Patricia Morrison's sentencing remarks had specifically praised Kieran's extraordinary heroism in saving his sister's life while condemning Derek's complete failure as stepfather and guardian in terms that resonated throughout the courthouse. This case represents the profound contrast between a child's selfless love and an adult's systematic abandonment of the most basic parental responsibilities, the judge had stated. Kieran Matthews demonstrated courage and protective instincts that shame every adult who failed to recognize and respond to his family's crisis. The judge's words had been widely reported in local media, contributing to community-wide discussions about collective responsibility for protecting vulnerable children and the importance of recognizing warning signs before family dysfunction reached crisis levels. Derek's conviction served not only as individual justice, but as a catalyst for examining systemic improvements in child protection and family support services. Rachel's transformation had paralleled her son's physical recovery through intensive work with family counselors, victim advocacy services, and the concrete support of community organizations that had rallied around their family. The process had been neither simple nor swift, requiring her to confront painful truths about the choices that had inadvertently enabled systematic neglect while learning to rebuild relationships with children who had learned to function without reliable adult protection. "I failed them in ways I'm still discovering," Rachel confided to family counselor Dr. Maria Santos during one of their weekly sessions in the comfortable office that had become a safe space for processing guilt, grief, and gradual healing. "I was so focused on survival, on keeping us housed and fed, that I missed the signs that Derek was completely failing as their caregiver. Kieran protected me from that knowledge because he was trying to hold our family together." Dr. Santos had helped Rachel understand the complex dynamics that had allowed Derek's systematic deception to succeed for so long. The manipulation of a desperate single mother, the strategic timing of sobriety around her brief home visits, and the interception of communications from schools and social services had created a perfect storm of concealment that had required sophisticated planning and deliberate deception. You were victimized by someone who exploited your trust and desperation, Dr. Santos had explained repeatedly, helping Rachel separate legitimate guilt from unfounded self-blame. Derek's systematic deception was designed specifically to prevent you from discovering the truth. Your children's protective silence wasn't a rejection of you, but evidence of their love and their desire to preserve what they believed was their only chance at family stability. With assistance from social services, victim assistance programs, and local charitable organizations, Rachel had completely restructured her work and living arrangements to provide appropriate supervision and care for her children while maintaining the financial stability necessary for their security and well-being. The transformation had required not only practical changes, but fundamental shifts in her understanding of family dynamics and parental responsibility. The family had relocated to a small two-bedroom house in Millbrook's Riverside neighborhood, carefully selected for its proximity to quality schools, safe walking routes, and a supportive community environment where neighbors maintained appropriate concern for children's welfare without intrusive oversight. The house represented everything their previous apartment had lacked: adequate space for privacy and growth, safety features that didn't require constant vigilance, and the kind of stable environment where childhood could flourish rather than merely survive. Kieran and Dahlia each had their own properly furnished bedrooms for the first time in their lives, spaces that reflected their individual personalities and interests rather than the shared survival necessities that had characterized their previous living arrangements. Kieran's room featured books about science and adventure, a desk for homework that no longer required completion by flashlight, and art supplies that Dahlia had chosen for him during one of their family shopping trips. His favorite possession was a framed photograph showing him and Dahlia on their first day at new schools, both smiling with the confidence of children who knew they were loved and protected. Dahlia's room had been decorated in the bright colors she loved, with space for playing with dolls and stuffed animals, a bookshelf filled with age-appropriate stories, and a small table where she could work on art projects without worrying about noise levels or adult reactions. Most importantly, her room included an intercom system that connected to Rachel's bedroom, allowing her to call for help during nightmares or emergencies while building confidence that adult assistance was always available. The house also featured a small fenced backyard where both children could play safely under appropriate supervision, complete with a swing set that had been donated and installed by community volunteers who wanted to contribute to their recovery. The outdoor space represented freedom and normalcy that had been impossible during their months of indoor confinement and hypervigilant safety management. Rachel's new employment arrangement reflected careful planning by social services and family counselors to ensure proper childcare while maintaining financial independence and professional satisfaction. She now worked a single shift at Murphy's Diner from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, allowing her to personally drop both children at school each morning, be present for after-school activities and homework supervision, and maintain proper evening routines that included family dinners and appropriate bedtime rituals. Manager Carlos Mendez, who had witnessed Rachel's dedication throughout the crisis and been moved by the community's rallying support for the family, had promoted her to assistant manager with increased hourly wages that more than compensated for her reduced working hours. The promotion also included comprehensive health insurance benefits that covered Kieran's ongoing medical needs, both children's psychological counseling requirements, and preventive care that had been impossible during their previous financial struggles. Rachel has become one of our most valued team members, Mendez explained to social services during one of their routine check-ins. Her experience managing crisis situations has made her exceptional at training new staff and handling difficult customers. She's also become a mentor for other single mothers on our staff who are struggling with work-life balance. The job advancement had provided more than financial stability. It had restored Rachel's confidence in her professional abilities and created a workplace community that understood and supported her family's recovery needs. Co-workers had become informal extended family members who celebrated the children's achievements and provided backup support during medical appointments or school events. Kieran's psychological healing had proved more complex and long-term than his physical recovery, requiring ongoing weekly sessions with Dr. Rebecca Martinez to address deeply ingrained patterns of hypervigilance and inappropriate responsibility for others' welfare. The therapeutic work focused on helping Kieran understand appropriate childhood concerns while learning to trust responsible adults to handle protection and care duties he had assumed prematurely. Kieran's recovery involves learning to be a child again, Dr. Martinez explained to Rachel during one of their family therapy sessions. He developed extraordinary coping mechanisms to survive impossible circumstances, but those same mechanisms can prevent him from experiencing normal childhood development if we don't address them therapeutically. The healing process required careful balance between validating Kieran's protective achievements while helping him release adult responsibilities that had been thrust upon him through systematic family dysfunction. Progress was measured through small but significant victories that accumulated over months of patient therapeutic work and consistent family support. Early in his recovery, Kieran had struggled with basic trust in adult competence. He would wake at night to check on Dahlia's safety, monitor Rachel's movements to ensure she was managing household responsibilities appropriately, and insert himself into adult conversations about family logistics. The hypervigilance that had kept his sister safe during months of abandonment had become a barrier to experiencing the security and protection that responsible adults were now providing. "I keep feeling like I need to make sure everything is okay," Kieran had confided to Dr. Martinez during one of their early sessions. "Even though I know Mom is taking good care of us now, part of me worries that something might go wrong if I'm not paying attention." The therapeutic work had focused on gradually building Kieran's confidence in adult reliability, while helping him understand that his vigilance was no longer necessary for family survival. Role-playing exercises, relaxation techniques, and cognitive behavioral strategies had slowly reduced his anxiety while building trust in the support systems that surrounded their family. One of the most significant breakthrough moments had occurred 6 months into his recovery, when Kieran had asked Rachel for help with a difficult homework assignment rather than struggling alone late into the night. The simple request represented a fundamental shift from self-reliance born of necessity to appropriate childhood dependence on adult guidance and support. "That was the first time he really let me be his mother again," Rachel had told Dr. Santos during their next counseling session. "For months, he had been politely accepting my care while clearly maintaining his own parallel systems for ensuring everything was managed properly. When he asked for help with math problems, it felt like he was finally trusting me to handle things that were legitimately my responsibility." School reintegration had marked another crucial milestone in Kieran's recovery process. Returning to Millbrook Elementary for 5th grade after months of hospital tutoring, he had discovered classmates who admired his heroism while working with teachers who understood his unique psychological needs and exceptional maturity. The school administration had collaborated extensively with his therapeutic team to create an environment that supported his healing while challenging him academically. Principal Dorothy Walsh had worked with counselors to prepare all staff for supporting Kieran's transition back to normal childhood experiences. Kieran's case taught our entire school community about the extraordinary burdens some children carry in silence, she explained during a staff development session. "Our goal is to provide him with opportunities to experience appropriate childhood activities, while respecting the wisdom he gained through his difficult experiences." Teacher Mr. David Foster had been specifically selected for his extensive experience with children recovering from trauma and his ability to create classroom environments that balanced academic challenge with emotional support. His approach with Kieran had focused on providing leadership opportunities that channeled his protective instincts into appropriate peer mentoring rather than inappropriate adult responsibilities. "Kieran has natural leadership abilities and problem-solving skills that we want to nurture in positive directions," Foster explained to the treatment team. "He serves as a reading mentor for younger students, helps with school safety programs, and assists classmates with organization strategies. These roles allow him to use his caregiving nature while maintaining healthy childhood boundaries." The classroom modifications had been subtle but significant. Kieran's desk was positioned where he could see the door and windows, reducing anxiety about monitoring his environment. He was given additional bathroom breaks and water privileges to address hypervigilance symptoms without drawing attention to his special needs. Most importantly, he was paired with classmates who demonstrated strong social skills and emotional maturity, providing peer support for his reintegration into normal childhood social dynamics. Academic performance had improved steadily as Kieran's anxiety decreased and his attention could focus fully on learning rather than survival monitoring. His grades had risen from the declining pattern evident during Derek's worst period of neglect to consistent excellence that reflected his true intellectual abilities. Teachers noted his exceptional writing skills, particularly in creative assignments that allowed him to process his experiences through fictional narratives. One of his most celebrated school projects had been a story about a young superhero who protected his community by helping adults recognize when children needed assistance. The narrative had demonstrated both his processing of trauma and his developing understanding that protection should flow from adults to children rather than the reverse. The story had been selected for the school's literary magazine and had received special recognition from the district's child advocacy coordinator. Dahlia's progress had demonstrated remarkable resilience enhanced by consistent support systems and therapeutic intervention that addressed her specific developmental needs. Now attending Riverside Elementary's full-day kindergarten program with comprehensive wraparound services, she exhibited the natural curiosity, playfulness, and social development appropriate for a 5-year-old child receiving proper care and stimulation. Her relationship with Kieran had evolved beautifully from total dependence and survival-based attachment to healthy sibling affection characterized by typical childhood interactions. They played together by choice rather than necessity, had occasional disagreements that resolved through normal sibling negotiation, and provided mutual support that enhanced rather than replaced parental care. The transformation represented successful therapeutic intervention that had preserved their special bond while establishing appropriate family hierarchies. Dahlia's attachment patterns have normalized significantly, reported child development specialist Dr. Amanda Chan during a 6-month evaluation. She now demonstrates secure attachment to her mother as primary caregiver, while maintaining the special closeness with Kieran that reflects their shared experiences. She's learned to seek adult help for problems, while still treasuring her brother's attention and affection. Teacher Mrs. Jennifer Park at Riverside Elementary had noted Dahlia's exceptional empathy and social skills, qualities that likely had been strengthened through her close bond with Kieran during their most difficult period. Her classroom behavior demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence for a 5-year-old, including unusual sensitivity to classmates who seemed upset or overwhelmed. Dahlia has become our unofficial classroom helper for children who are having difficult days, Park observed. She seems to instinctively recognize when someone needs comfort or encouragement, and she responds with gentleness that's extraordinary for her age. Her experiences have given her wisdom about caring for others that she uses in beautiful, age-appropriate ways. Art therapy sessions had revealed Dahlia's processing of their family's transformation through drawings that evolved from scenes of children caring for each other to pictures showing adults and children in appropriate protective relationships. Her most recent artwork depicted family scenes with all 3 members present and active, engaged in normal domestic activities like cooking together, reading stories, and playing in their backyard. The therapeutic work had also addressed Dahlia's separation anxiety, which had initially made school drop-offs and other transitions extremely difficult. Through graduated exposure and consistent reassurance, she had learned to trust that separations from Kieran and Rachel were temporary and safe, and that reunion was guaranteed rather than dependent on crisis management or survival strategies. One of the most touching developments had been Dahlia's renewed relationship with Mr. Flopsy, her stuffed rabbit. During the worst periods of their previous life, the toy had provided comfort during Derek's violent episodes and security during frightening nights. As their new life stabilized, Mr. Flopsy had transitioned from security object to beloved childhood companion, reflecting Dahlia's own transition from survival mode to normal childhood development. The community's ongoing support had provided a stable foundation for the family's continued healing and development that extended far beyond immediate crisis response. Murphy's Diner had become an unofficial coordination center for assistance, with regular customers contributing to funds for continued medical care, educational expenses, and family activities that created positive memories to balance their traumatic experiences. Local businesses had continued providing services at reduced rates, while Riverside neighborhood families had welcomed the Matthews family into informal childcare networks, community activities, and social support systems that provided Rachel with reliable assistance and the children with positive role models and safe recreational opportunities. The support had evolved to address long-term needs rather than just emergency intervention. Community members had established a scholarship fund for both children's future educational expenses, recognizing that their extraordinary experiences might lead to careers in helping professions or advocacy work. Local mentorship programs had connected Kieran with adult volunteers who shared his interests in science and problem-solving, providing positive male role models who demonstrated healthy adult responsibility. Church groups had expanded beyond meal assistance and emergency support to include the family in ongoing community activities that provided social connection and spiritual support without pressure or judgment. The inclusive approach had helped all three family members develop broader social networks while maintaining their privacy and autonomy. Perhaps most significantly, the community had initiated systemic changes inspired by their case. Schools had improved protocols for recognizing and reporting suspected neglect, while neighborhood watch programs had expanded to include informal monitoring of family well-being rather than just crime prevention. Social services had received increased funding for family preservation programs, and local healthcare providers had implemented better screening for signs of child welfare concerns. The broader impact had extended beyond Millbrook to influence state-level discussions about child protection, family support services, and community responsibility for vulnerable populations. Kieran's case had been cited in legislative hearings about improving intervention systems and providing better resources for working families struggling with inadequate support systems. The lasting impact on hospital and community professionals who had witnessed Kieran's case had created ripple effects that would protect future children through improved recognition and response systems. Dr. Patricia Williams had become actively involved in state-level child advocacy work, using her experience to develop improved hospital protocols for identifying neglect and training medical staff in appropriate intervention techniques that balanced family privacy with child protection. Kieran's case taught us that children's extraordinary resilience can sometimes mask systematic abuse. Dr. Williams explained during a medical conference presentation. We learned to look beyond surface presentations to understand the full context of family dynamics, and to recognize that children's protective behavior toward adults can indicate dysfunction rather than healthy family relationships. Social worker Janet Morrison had incorporated lessons learned from Kieran's testimony into new interview approaches for children in crisis situations, emphasizing the importance of allowing children to tell their complete stories while providing appropriate emotional support. Her techniques had been adopted by social services agencies across the region, improving outcomes for vulnerable children through better documentation and more effective intervention strategies. Detective Sarah Coleman had developed training programs for law enforcement officers that used Kieran's case as an example of recognizing systematic neglect disguised as temporary family difficulties. Her curriculum emphasized the importance of thorough investigation, careful documentation, and coordinated response between multiple agencies to ensure comprehensive protection for endangered children. The case had also influenced family court procedures, with judges receiving additional training about the complex dynamics that allow systematic abuse to persist within seemingly functional family structures. The improved understanding had led to better outcomes in custody decisions and more effective protective orders that addressed the sophisticated manipulation tactics used by abusive adults. Kieran's ongoing relationship with balloon vendor Mr. Antonio Restrepo had provided an unexpected but significant element of his healing process that demonstrated the power of community support and understanding. Restrepo, who had witnessed the accident and provided crucial testimony during the investigation, had become a trusted family friend who helped Kieran process his complicated emotions about the balloons that had initially attracted Dahlia into danger. Their regular conversations, which occurred during weekly visits to Restrepo's weekend market stall, had helped Kieran understand that objects, situations, and normal childhood experiences were not inherently dangerous when proper adult supervision created appropriate safety measures. This understanding had been crucial for allowing him to gradually release the hypervigilant fear that had prevented him from enjoying normal childhood activities and experiences. Mr. Restrepo helped me understand that balloons are meant to make children happy, Kieran had told Dr. Martinez during one of their sessions. The problem wasn't the balloons or even Dahlia wanting to see them. The problem was that Derek wasn't awake to take us safely across the street like a real father would have done. The relationship had evolved into a mentorship that provided Kieran with positive adult male attention while teaching him about small business management, community service, and the importance of bringing joy to others through appropriate work. Restrepo had begun teaching Kieran basic balloon artistry, a skill that Kieran had used to entertain younger children at hospital visits and community events. Most importantly, their friendship had helped Kieran understand that his split-second decision to save Dahlia, while heroic and necessary under the circumstances, represented a failure of adult protection rather than appropriate childhood responsibility. This understanding had been crucial for his psychological healing and for preventing guilt about not being able to protect his sister from needing protection in the first place. The story's emotional climax had occurred during Kieran's first voluntary return to the accident site since his recovery, an event carefully planned by his therapeutic team as a crucial step in processing trauma and achieving psychological closure. Accompanied by Rachel and Dr. Martinez, he had stood at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street where his life had changed permanently, experiencing the location from the perspective of a protected child rather than a desperate guardian. Rather than experiencing fear, trauma, or regret, Kieran had felt a profound sense of completion and peace as he understood that his split-second decision had saved not only Dahlia's life, but ultimately had saved their entire family by exposing Derek's negligence and triggering the intervention that brought them safety and proper care. "I'm glad I could save her," he had said simply, holding Rachel's hand while watching normal family traffic navigate the intersection safely under proper adult supervision. "But I'm even more glad that she'll never need saving like that again." The moment had represented the culmination of months of therapeutic work and family healing, demonstrating Kieran's successful transition from survival-focused hypervigilance to appropriate childhood trust in adult protection. His ability to revisit the site of trauma without re-experiencing crisis indicated successful trauma processing and psychological recovery. Family therapy sessions with Dr. Maria Santos had helped all 3 family members navigate their evolving dynamics as they learned to function as a healthy family unit supported by appropriate community resources. Rachel had developed skills for balancing parental authority with respect for the wisdom and maturity Kieran had gained through his experiences, while Kieran had practiced allowing his mother to handle adult responsibilities while maintaining his close protective bond with Dahlia in age-appropriate ways. Our family therapy focuses on building new patterns while honoring the strength that carried them through their crisis, Dr. Santos explained to colleagues during a case study presentation. Kieran's protective instincts and leadership abilities are valuable qualities that we want to preserve and channel positively rather than suppress or pathologize. Dahlia had continued developing security in having multiple trusted adults available for support and protection, while cherishing her special relationship with Kieran that acknowledged their shared experience without requiring her to carry inappropriate emotional burdens or responsibilities. Her progress in forming secure attachments while maintaining special sibling bonds represented successful therapeutic intervention that preserved important relationships while establishing healthy family hierarchies. The therapeutic work had also addressed practical skills for managing normal family conflicts, household responsibilities, and decision-making processes that distributed age-appropriate tasks without recreating the survival-based role reversals that had characterized their previous life. All 3 family members had learned to communicate needs, negotiate disagreements, and support each other in ways that enhanced rather than replaced proper adult leadership. One of the most significant developments had been the establishment of new family traditions that created positive memories and reinforced their changed circumstances. Weekly family game nights provided structured fun while teaching cooperation and healthy competition. Monthly outings to local attractions helped them explore their community while building confidence in their security and stability. The traditions also included acknowledgement of their shared experience without allowing it to define their future. They observed the anniversary of Kieran's accident not as a day of mourning, but as a celebration of courage, love, and the community support that had transformed their lives. The observance included volunteer work at the hospital where Kieran had recovered, providing them with opportunities to give back to the community while reinforcing their progress and resilience. The final scene of their transformation had taken place in their backyard on a warm Saturday morning in late spring, nearly a year after the accident that had shattered and ultimately healed their family. Kieran pushed Dahlia on the swing set that community volunteers had installed, while Rachel tended a small vegetable garden nearby and occasionally joined their play. The scene represented everything that had been missing during their months of crisis: relaxed enjoyment, spontaneous laughter, age-appropriate activities, and protective adult supervision that allowed children to simply be children. The normalcy of their interaction spoke volumes about their recovery. Casual conversation about school friends, plans for summer activities, and Dahlia's excitement about learning to ride a bicycle represented the profound transformation from survival mode to genuine family life characterized by security, appropriate care, and realistic hope for continued healing and growth. "Look how high I can swing," Dahlia called out, her laughter carrying the music that had been missing from their household for so long. The sound represented freedom from fear, trust in safety, and the restoration of childhood joy that proper adult protection had made possible. "Be careful, but have fun," Rachel called back, her voice carrying the confident authority of a parent who had learned to balance protection with independence, guidance with freedom. Her tone reflected the growth she had achieved through therapy, support, and the hard work of rebuilding appropriate family relationships. Kieran's response demonstrated his own transformation as he encouraged Dahlia's adventurous spirit while trusting Rachel to provide appropriate safety monitoring. "You're getting really good at that," he told his sister, his role clearly that of supportive older brother rather than anxious guardian. "Maybe tomorrow we can ask Mom if we can walk to the park and try the bigger swings there." The simple exchange encompassed the miracle of their recovery. Children expressing normal desires for adventure and exploration, a parent providing appropriate guidance and boundary setting, and family members trusting each other to fulfill their respective roles without the hypervigilance and survival strategies that had previously defined their relationships. As the story concluded, Kieran reflected on his journey from forced guardian to properly protected child, while watching Dahlia play with the carefree abandon that proper adult supervision had made possible. His physical scars had healed completely, leaving only faint reminders of his sacrifice that he wore with quiet pride rather than shame or regret. His emotional healing continued through ongoing therapy and family support, while his relationship with Dahlia had evolved into the healthy sibling bond that enhanced both their lives without requiring either child to assume adult responsibilities. Most importantly, Kieran had learned that children deserve protection, care, and guidance from responsible adults, allowing him to experience the remainder of his childhood with appropriate support while maintaining the empathy, courage, and protective instincts that would serve him well throughout his life. The wisdom he had gained through suffering had been transformed into strength for helping others rather than burden for carrying alone. The ending emphasized realistic hope and ongoing resilience while acknowledging that recovery required sustained commitment from individuals, families, and communities working together to protect vulnerable members. Kieran's heroic action had saved Dahlia's life and ultimately had led to their family's rescue from a dangerous situation that could have had fatal consequences without his intervention and the community's response to the crisis he had exposed through his sacrifice. The transformation was not presented as perfect or complete, but as ongoing progress supported by love, professional help, and community commitment to ensuring that no child would bear adult responsibilities alone. The guardian's burden had been lifted not through individual heroism, but through collective recognition that protecting children required sustained adult commitment and community vigilance. The final image showed the Matthews family walking together toward Riverside Elementary on the first day of a new school year, their progress measured not just in steps taken, but in the confidence, security, and hope that characterized their movement through the world. Kieran carried his own backpack filled with age-appropriate school supplies and homework. Dahlia skipped excitedly beside him while chattering about kindergarten adventures, and Rachel accompanied them not from necessity, but from the joy and privilege of being present for their important daily experiences. The busy streets they navigated safely represented the transformation from danger to security, from isolation to community support, and from survival to genuine family life where children could focus on learning, growing, and enjoying childhood experiences under the protection of responsible adults who ensured that no child would bear adult responsibilities alone. Their story continued not as victims who had survived trauma, but as a family that had discovered the strength to heal, the courage to trust, and the wisdom to build a future worthy of the sacrifice that had made it possible. The guardian's burden had become the foundation for a guardian's blessing. The knowledge that love, when supported by proper adult protection and community commitment, could transform even the darkest circumstances into hope for tomorrow.